why don't we do some hands-on work and write some tests for an actual project? We'll use the application that we built in the Build Your First App series. So the main thing that we'll focus on for this episode is the registration process. If a user wants to register, well, they visit this page, and if they don't fill out the correct values here, well, they should get some kind of error. I want to write some tests to verify and ensure that this takes place. But then secondly, if we do fill out everything correctly, like so, and we click register, we should then have an account where we can file DMCA notices. Cool, let's get started. If I switch over to Sublime, well, I have this functional folder. Let's create a new file here, and we'll save it as auth-test.php. I will add a little snippet here to get us going. Auth test. All right, so don't forget we're going to extend Laravel's test case class. And if we take a look at that, that one extends the Laravel specific extension. Cool. So now what does it do? Well, at its simplest, it registers a user, right? But then maybe we could have one more. What else does it do? Well, it notifies a user of registration errors. That would be valid too, right? Okay, so let's dig in. How would we register a user? Well, this is a situation where we might want custom methods. For example, I sort of want to say something like this, register, and I give some credentials, and then, and only then, do we defer back to the integrated's API. For example, verify in database. If we register a user, then one way to make sure everything worked is to ensure that a user record was saved to the database. Something like, look in the users table and make sure that you find these credentials that we would create. And then finally, if I go through that registration process, they sign up, what page should they then be on? So we could say, and see page is notices/create. If I go back to Chrome, notice that when we did register, we were sent there. So that's what I'd like to verify. All right, cool. So we know that we need some credentials, right? Credentials, and we'll just say email equals foo@example.com. So maybe we can try to register a user using this set of credentials, and then once they do register, we just make sure that we find a user in the users table that has the given email address. Okay, so now we can create our custom little helper method. And the only requirement here is that you return the this object. And that way we can continue chaining like this. So at the bottom, I will go ahead and add return this. Okay, so how do we register a user? Well, we accept some overrides, right? That will be an array because we're passing that through. And then, well, we know that we're going to visit the registration page, right? So visit auth/register. And next, I want to submit the form. So I could say and submit form. And really, that's the extent of what I want to do to register a user. Now, because each of these method calls return this, that means we could do something like this instead. All right, so we're submitting the form that has a button text of register, and I'm going to pass through some fields. So basically what I want to do, if I switch back to Chrome, and if we log out, let's go back to register, I want to hit register, but also provide the fields for name, email address, and the password. So as we've learned, we can use testdummy to make this process pretty quick. Use Laracast, testdummy factory, and I always alias it to testdummy. All right, so to get us going, well, we have our fields, and we could say testdummy, I want the attributes for a new user. So right off the bat, if we're using testdummy, well, I need to go into a factories folder within the test directory, and you'll see that I've already created an all.php. We've already reviewed this process, so most of it should be old news. Anyways, if I open this up, you'll see it's empty. We just want a quick factory for a user. Remember, this is where we define the makeup for our records. So let's see, a user requires a name. We'll use faker name, an email address, which is faker email, and then finally a password, which we can use bcrypton, and we'll just hard code that in. Cool, easy enough. So now we're going to get the attributes for a user and save that to fields, but think about it, that's not quite enough. We have the name, we have the email, we have the password, but we also need that password confirmation field as well. So we could say fields equals fields or plus equals, and then we'll just pass this in manually and make that equal to whatever the password was that we generated. All right, so we're getting there, but think about it. We wanted to have the option to pass through some overrides. Remember right here, where we pass through and explicitly set the email. So how do we attach the overrides to TestDummy? Well, we just do it as the second argument. Give me the attributes for a user, but I want to be explicit about any of these overrides I give you. Okay, and then finally, to clean it up just a little bit more and make it more reusable, we could extract that to a method. How about get register fields, and then we pass through the overrides, like that. So let's accept that, and then finally, I'll paste that in. And let's see, we could rename that to user, and then return user plus password confirmation. That's a little clearer, I think. All right, let's review this. Our first test, we want to register a user. So we call a custom method here. If we take a look at that, all we do is get the registration fields for the form. We prepare those. We then visit the register page and submit the form that has a button of register, and we pass through the fields for the form. So you know what? I think that should be enough to trigger our test suite. So if I switch to the terminal, let's run PHP unit on our functional directory, and it passes. Great, we have green. But one problem here, if we run it again, well crap, it's red. And as you can imagine, the issue is probably, well, we're not clearing out the database, right? If we take a look, select star from users, yeah, there you go. We forgot to clear out the table when we were done. So when we ran the test a second time, well, that record already existed, and our validation didn't allow the form to process. So let's delete from users where the ID equals 7. And then if I switch back, well, we already learned about this. All we have to do is pull in our database transactions. And that should do it. So now we will use our database transactions, and this should clear everything out for us automatically. Let's try it. PHP unit, run it again, we get green, and now every time I do it, we should get green. Cool, so our first test is done, and even better, we have some reusable code that if you wanted to, you could even extract to a trait or something like that. Or if your app is small enough, you could keep it here, or you could place it within your test case, like right here. It doesn't matter. Either way, you get green. I'm going to keep it in our auth test just to keep it clean and simple. And now let's do the next test that we talked about. It notifies a user of registration errors. So why don't we write this out just with normal text? What are we trying to do here? Well, assuming we have a user with this email address already, well, if that's the case, we shouldn't be able to sign up new users with the same. That makes sense, right? If we have a user in our database that has that email address, and if somebody else tries to sign up, we shouldn't be able to sign up new users with that same email. Okay, how do we make this work? Well, it sounds like we need to say, given we have a user with the given email address. That's easy enough. We'll say this create user, and once again, we'll say email equals foo@example.com. That will be our overrides. Now, if I scroll down to the bottom, or why don't we put it right here, in fact, create user with the overrides. Okay, we can use TestDummy for this. TestDummy, create a new user, and use our overrides if we have any. So with that in mind, if that's optional, why don't we make this default to an array? And that should do it. We'll return the results. Okay, assuming we have a user with the given email address, well, whenever a user tries to register now, it shouldn't work. That makes sense. And now, because we've done some of the prep work already, this should be a lot easier. I could say this, register, and we want to use those overrides again. So why don't we just save it in the process? Okay, register a user with that same email address, and I'm going to expect to see some kind of error message. Something like the email has already been taken. And then further, Well, I should no longer be on this page. I should still be on the registration page. So let's make sure that we see the page is auth register. Or if we wanted to write this out to be a little more readable, this register and see the message on page auth/register. It's the exact same thing. I just offer two methods to make it a little more readable in some situations. All right, so I think we are ready to try this out. I'll add our test annotation. And if we now run PHP unit on the functional directory, very cool, we get green. So now, yeah, like I was saying, if you want to clean things up, you could extract this to the test case, to the parent class, or you could even create traits, which you can then import wherever you need to. The basic workflow for that would be something like this. Why don't we call it registers users? And then, well, maybe we could add like a support directory, tests, support, registers users. And then we'll add that here and paste it in. Okay, but that wouldn't be enough, would it? If we come back, well, we could try it, run it, but yeah, it's going to fail. And that's because, well, we haven't autoloaded the trait properly. Remember, there's no PSR2 in the support directory. So instead, we'll just do this. In our autoload dev, within the class map section, we'll just say autoload anything within the support directory. So now I could run composer dump autoload. And if we now run PHP unit again, let's see. We just have to import that. Let's go back. Remember, we're pulling in test dummy. So we just want to make sure, of course, that we import that as well. Okay, small mistake, but that should bring us back to green, and it does. The key thing to note here is, well, one, you could just leave it here. If the only place where you want to register a user is this test case, then it's fine. Or option two, you can extract all of that to the parent test case class. Or three, if your project is a little bigger, you could extract a trait, which we just did, and now you have the flexibility to import that wherever you require that sort of behavior. Pretty cool.